The rain had been falling since dawn, soft but steady. The kind that blurred the edges of the city and made everything feel slower than usual. Emily Carter noticed it only because she had nothing else to notice. She stood in her small Seattle apartment, one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, watching people move below her window. Cars passed. Umbrellas opened and closed. Life continued, busy and certain. While something inside her felt strangely paused, Emily was 38 years old. An age that sounded confident when spoken out loud. She had a stable job as an editor at a publishing company, a job many people admired. She lived in a clean apartment, paid her bills on time, and had a partner who cared for her. On paper, her life looked complete. Yet that morning, as she stared through the glass, a quiet thought settled in her mind, heavier than the gray sky outside. She wondered when her days had started feeling so similar, and why she felt like a guest in her own life. She finished her coffee without tasting it and got ready for work. The routine was familiar simple clothes, light makeup, hair pulled back neatly. She looked at herself in the mirror and smiled out of habit. The smile faded quickly. There was nothing wrong with her reflection, yet she felt distant from it, like she was playing a role she had learned too well at the office. Emily moved through her day efficiently. Emails were answered. Manuscripts were reviewed. Meetings came and went. Her coworkers laughed and complained, shared weekend plans, talked about shows and dinners and small goals. Emily listened, nodded, and joined in when expected. She was good at appearing present. But inside, her thoughts wandered to questions she rarely allowed herself to ask. When had she stopped wanting more? When had she decided that safe was enough? During lunch, her coworker Sarah mentioned a small photography exhibition happening downtown that weekend. "You should come," Sarah said casually. "It's local artists, something different." Emily almost refused. She usually did. Weekends were predictable, shared with her partner Mark, filled with errands and quiet dinners. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the word different. Maybe it was the feeling that if she said no again, nothing would ever change. "I'll think about it," Emily replied, surprised by her own interest. That same morning, hundreds of miles north in Vancouver, Daniel Brooks sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop. He had been awake since before sunrise, not because he needed to be, but because sleep no longer came easily. His apartment was small and cluttered, filled with old camera bags, framed photographs leaning against walls, and reminders of a life driven by passion rather than routine. Daniel was 42 and had once believed that passion was enough. He had traveled across countries chasing moments worth capturing. His photographs had been published, praised, even sold. But praise did not last forever, and neither did opportunities. Slowly, his work became less frequent. Freelance jobs turned into short-term contracts, then into long gaps filled with uncertainty. Now, responsibility filled those gaps. Rent, equipment, repairs, practical choices. His camera still rested close by, but he reached for it less often. Not because he had stopped loving photography, but because he feared loving it too much again. An email notification blinked on his screen. He had seen it earlier but ignored it. Now, with nothing else demanding his attention, he opened it. The message was an invitation to participate in a small photography exhibition in Seattle. A curator had found his older work online and believed it deserved to be seen again. Daniel leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Seattle was not far, yet it felt distant in every way that mattered. Accepting would mean travel, expenses, and the risk of disappointment. It would mean reopening a door he had closed to protect himself. He hovered over the delete button. His finger hesitated. He thought about the last time he had taken a photo that truly mattered to him. He remembered the feeling of waiting for the right light, the quiet focus, the sense of being exactly where he belonged. He wondered when he had started believing that those moments were behind him. Daniel closed his laptop without deleting the email. Back in Seattle, Emily returned home that evening to Mark, who was already preparing dinner. Mark was gentle, dependable, and thoughtful. He remembered anniversaries, asked about her day, and supported her career. They had been together for years, building a life that felt steady and secure. How was work? Mark asked, smiling as he stirred a pot on the stove. Busy, Emily replied. It was true, but incomplete. She watched him move around the kitchen, comfortable and familiar. She felt affection, but also a quiet distance she could not explain. Over dinner, Mark talked about his plans for the weekend. Grocery shopping, visiting his parents, a movie night at home. Emily listened, nodding, her mind drifting again. There's a photography exhibition downtown, she said suddenly, surprising herself. I might go. Mark looked up. That sounds nice. Want me to come? Emily hesitated. I think I'd like to go alone, just for a bit. Mark paused, then nodded. Of course. Do whatever you feel like. His easy acceptance made her chest tighten. She wondered why honesty felt heavier than silence. The week passed quickly. Emily found herself thinking about the exhibition more than she expected. She didn't know why it mattered. She told herself it was just a way to break routine, nothing more. Still, a quiet anticipation followed her through each day. In Vancouver, Daniel finally reopened his laptop. He reread the invitation carefully this time. The curator had chosen 3 of his photographs, all taken years ago. Images of empty streets at dawn, of people caught in quiet moments, of light breaking through ordinary scenes. Daniel remembered each one clearly. He remembered who he had been when he took them. He replied with a simple yes. The decision brought both relief and fear. Almost immediately, doubts followed. Was it too late? Would anyone care? Had he waited too long? He pushed the thoughts aside and began preparing. He cleaned his equipment, selected prints, booked a modest place to stay. Each step felt like reclaiming a part of himself he had set aside. The day of the exhibition arrived under a clear evening sky. Emily walked into the gallery alone, her coat still damp from the rain. The space was small but warmly lit, filled with soft conversations and quiet music. People moved slowly, studying photographs, sipping drinks, speaking in low voices. Emily wandered from wall to wall, letting the images speak to her. Some were beautiful, some were clever. Then she stopped. One photograph held her attention completely. It showed a single figure standing at the edge of a city street just before sunrise. The street was empty, the buildings tall and silent. Light spilled gently across the pavement, suggesting the start of something new. The figure looked small, but not lost, waiting. Emily felt a sudden ache in her chest. She didn't know why the image affected her so deeply, only that it felt personal. Like a question she had been avoiding. Do you like that one? The voice came from beside her. She turned and saw a man about her age, tall, with tired eyes and a calm presence. He watched the photograph with quiet care. Yes, she said honestly. It feels real. He smiled slightly. That's good to hear. You took it. She asked. He nodded. A long time ago. They stood together in silence for a moment, both looking at the image. Emily felt aware of him without feeling pressured. There was no rush in his posture, no performance in his voice. I'm Emily, she said. Daniel, he replied. They talked briefly, simply. About the photo, about the city, about nothing important and everything that mattered. Emily didn't tell him about her job or her relationship. Daniel didn't explain his doubts or his fears. They spoke as 2 strangers sharing a moment of understanding. Across the room, the curator called Daniel's name. He excused himself politely. Emily watched him walk away, surprised by the feeling that followed. It wasn't excitement. It was recognition. She left the gallery soon after, stepping back into the cool night air. The city felt different, sharper, more alive. She walked home slowly, replaying the image in her mind. Along with the quiet conversation that had lingered longer than expected, Daniel stood by his photographs, answering questions, accepting compliments he wasn't sure he deserved. Yet his thoughts kept returning to the woman who had seen his work not as art, but as truth. It had been a long time since anyone had done that. As the night ended and the gallery emptied, Both Emily and Daniel carried something new with them. Not a plan, not a promise, just the sense that something had shifted. They didn't know each other's lives. They didn't know what choices lay ahead, but both felt the same quiet thought forming. It's clear and undeniable. Maybe this was not the end of the story. Maybe it was the beginning. The days after the exhibition felt heavier, yet sharper, as if the world had subtly shifted. Emily couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. The photograph they had both lingered over replayed in her mind constantly, the quiet figure. The light spilling across the empty street, the sense of waiting. It wasn't just the photograph. It was him. The way he had looked at it, with gentle care and honesty, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the calmness in his voice, the quiet intensity of his attention. It was unfamiliar and unsettling. Emily tried to return to her routine. She went to work, edited manuscripts, and laughed with coworkers. She returned to Mark in the evenings, greeted him with polite warmth, and shared weekend plans. But the usual rhythm of her life now felt constricted. She noticed how often she had been settling for enough rather than truly living. She felt restless in her comfortable apartment, restless in her predictable relationship, restless in the life she had accepted without question. She told herself it was nothing, a passing thought. But she could feel the tug of something more. Daniel, back in Vancouver, was experiencing a similar restlessness. The exhibition had ended, the photos had been praised, and he had returned to his apartment with his prints neatly stacked in the corner. He unpacked his camera and touched it carefully, as though reconnecting with an old friend. Each photograph reminded him of why he had chosen this life, why he had once risked everything for it. But the excitement he had expected after the exhibition never fully came. Instead, he felt a quiet longing for connection, for recognition, for something he couldn't yet name. They began communicating in small ways. Emails at first, formal and restrained, almost cautious. Daniel sent a thank you note for attending the exhibition, and Emily replied, simple and polite. But soon the tone changed. Messages lingered longer, words felt lighter, conversations deepened. They discussed photography, books, life choices, the cities they loved. Emily confessed her fascination with light and shadow in storytelling, and Daniel admitted how he sometimes felt trapped between responsibility and desire. Each message built an invisible bridge, linking their separate lives in a quiet intimacy that felt both safe and electric. One afternoon, Emily found herself staring at her computer, reading Daniel's latest email 3 times. He had written about the feeling of being seen without pretense, about the courage it took to pursue something meaningful despite fear. Emily felt a lump in her throat, recognizing the exact truth of her own life. She realized that desire wasn't always about romance or excitement, could be about authenticity, about finding someone who saw her clearly. She wondered if she had been avoiding this truth all her life because it was uncomfortable, because it demanded courage. Daniel, on his side, stared out the window at the Vancouver skyline. Rain fell softly, tapping against the glass. A mirror of the Seattle morning when he had first received the exhibition invitation. He thought about Emily's messages, her words carefully chosen, yet vulnerable. She had admitted her doubts, her longing, her curiosity. He understood it immediately. She was standing at the edge of something, just as he had been all these years. And he realized that if he didn't pursue this connection, he might always wonder what could have been. The following week, Emily decided to take a small risk. She told Mark she wanted to explore the city alone, to see art, to have some time for herself. Mark nodded, as he always did, trusting her judgment. But Emily felt a strange mix of freedom and guilt. She walked through the streets of Seattle with a restless energy she hadn't felt in years. Every corner, every passing stranger, every subtle reflection of light seemed sharper, more alive. It was as if the city itself recognized her shift, nudging her towards something unknown. Daniel booked a short trip to Seattle under the pretext of attending a photography workshop. He didn't tell anyone else. The city, the exhibition, the chance to reconnect with Emily, these were his reasons. though he didn't fully understand the depth of what he was seeking. The moment the plane landed, a thrill ran through him. The city felt like a puzzle piece fitting back into place, and he imagined seeing Emily again, imagining how different it would feel this time. They met again near the harbor, a quiet open space where the water reflected the fading sunlight. Emily arrived first, pacing slightly, uncertain whether this moment would feel as profound as she imagined. Daniel approached moments later, carrying nothing but himself and the calm confidence of someone who had faced fear and chosen to step forward. Their eyes met immediately, a recognition that was unspoken but powerful. They spoke first about trivial things: weather, the city, a new exhibition opening nearby, but their words were layered with meaning. Every glance, every pause carried unspoken thoughts. Emily felt herself breathing differently, lighter yet more alert. Daniel noticed how carefully she chose her words, how her eyes seemed to look past the surface. There was no rush. There were no promises, just presence. After a while, they walked along the water's edge. The sky was painted with the colors of sunset, soft oranges and fading purples. The city lights began to twinkle across the horizon, reflecting on the gentle waves. Emily spoke softly, almost to herself, about the feeling of living a life that wasn't fully hers. She confessed the small, quiet fears she carried, fears that had kept her from fully embracing her own desires. Daniel listened, not interrupting, simply absorbing her words with care. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to see something like this," Emily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know why, but being here, talking to you, it feels real." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes we spend so long living according to what we think we should want that we forget what we actually desire. And when we finally recognize it, it's intense." They stopped walking, standing side by side, looking out at the water. There was a long silence, but it was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than awkwardness. Emily felt her heart racing, not from fear, but from the undeniable truth that she had been neglecting a part of herself for too long. Daniel felt the same. The risk of feeling deeply, of stepping outside routine, was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. Neither touched, yet the closeness was electric. They spoke about possibility, about the courage it takes to change, about the quiet yearning that had led them both here. Emily realized that desire wasn't about possession or urgency. It was about authenticity, about living fully. Daniel understood that connection wasn't about control or certainty. It was about openness, honesty, and willingness to face vulnerability. The evening faded and the harbor grew quiet. The city lights glimmered like distant stars, reflecting in the water and in their eyes. Emily and Daniel walked back toward the edge of the pier, neither wanting to break the fragile bubble of truth they had created. "I don't know what will happen next," Emily said finally, her voice low but steady. "Neither do I," Daniel replied, "but I do know that ignoring what we feel, is no longer an option." They stopped again, both aware of the invisible line between the lives they had known and the lives they could choose. Emily thought of Mark, of routine, of comfort. Daniel thought of the years he had spent avoiding risk of responsibilities and fear. And yet, for the first time in a long while, neither wanted the safe choice. Both wanted the life they could build by listening to their own hearts. As they said goodbye that night, there was no promise, no plan, only the quiet understanding that some desires are about becoming the person you are meant to be, not taking what you want from others. They parted with the knowledge that the next step would require courage, honesty, and trust in the unknown. Emily returned home, the city's night air heavy with possibilities. She sat by her window, looking at the lights and reflections, thinking about how small decisions like attending an exhibition or replying to a single message could ripple through a life and change it forever. Daniel stood on his hotel balcony, staring at the Seattle skyline, thinking the same thing. Two lives, two cities, connected by a moment that felt ordinary yet extraordinary. And for the first time in years, they both understood clearly that life is fragile and fleeting, and it waits for no one. Waiting is safe, comfortable, but it is not living. Some desires demand acknowledgement. Some truths demand action. As Emily and Daniel drifted to sleep that night, the question lingered between them. Unspoken but undeniable, would they have the courage to pursue the lives they truly wanted? To honor the desires that had waited silently for too long? Or would they retreat into familiarity, into what was known, leaving the ache of possibility behind? The city slept quietly around them, unaware that two hearts were on the brink of change. The harbor, the photographs, the quiet conversations, they were threads of something larger, weaving a story that had only just begun. A story about choice, about desire, and about the courage to live fully, because one life is all we have. And sometimes the bravest act is to finally let your desires be fulfilled.